When we look at this history and its transformation of liberty, the replacement of classical liberty with this nihilism, we could well respond to this by saying, this alien view of freedom has been forced on us, unjustly imposed on a country in which we are not all nihilists. Consider, in light of that claim, the following remark, just a sample of average conservative thinking. Religion and spirituality are the most profound motivators in human history, along with a lust for power. Religion and spirituality have motivated historical change throughout history. That's not a popular lesson for us today, for we live in a secular age. And in our own country, it's very hard for us to understand a society in which religion provides a comprehensive worldview, an understanding of politics, of moral values, of social ethics, of human action. Above all, consider this. A religiously motivated society can be almost impervious to the attempt to import alien values. The usual critique of the decline or decay of the West argues that our decline is due to a departure from principles based on a real, absolute sense of moral values. Patently, nihilists do that, depart, because they do not have that sense, that being their base position. How could a catastrophic decline result in a country with one group upholding such principles and another group replacing that conception of morality with something that made sense to them? Was the change not due to the activity of both groups? The one group replacing principles of right and wrong with autonomous judgments or valuations, what Nietzsche lays out in Beyond Good and Evil, where he condemned the error inflicted on men since Plato by the invention of the idea of transcendental goodness, a nightmare, he calls it, from which at last we in the West have awakened. So one group wiping that error away and the other group resisting this, proving to be impervious to the attempt to import alien values. Resistance is not what was given. Rather, the non-nihilists proving to be, in fact, to a quite appreciable degree, receptive to what the historian here labels alien values. And you'll see why I have to pause over his word, values. We have been pursuing an answer to the question, how could it be Nietzsche's outlook that gives us our conception of freedom? This being a thing that you might find improbable. I could almost answer that question by asking a counter question. How is it that Nietzsche's outlook gave us the word values, the central concept of the entire edifice of late modern morality? This is a surprisingly underappreciated fact. The first person in history to use the word values is Nietzsche. If you consult the 20-volume Oxford English Dictionary, which lists the earliest documented use of English words, you don't find an entry for the word values at all until the 1986 supplement, which located the earliest use of the English word values in a work of sociology published in 1918. Where did that word come from? It came from Nietzsche, who wrote in 1886 of the need for a reevaluation of all ancient values. Values, and they're always plural, come from valuing, and it is people who value, and differently, as we have just seen, and as was underlined by Mill, speaking of tastes and pursuits. According to Nietzsche, each person is generating not just assessments of good, but electing some experience or outcome to be what he or she counts as good, to be the standard for now, at that point in their lives, of their verdicts. In our culture, and for a century, values has replaced talk of the good because the classical outlook does not capture what people today nihilistically believe about this. The philosopher George Grant said that the language of values is an obscuring language for morality, used when the idea of purpose has been destroyed. And that is why it is so widespread in North America. But the very reason that values talk took over was that to a nihilist, talk of the good was itself exactly that, an obscuring language for morality, used when the idea of an existing telos of things, giving each thing its purpose, was no longer credible in the eyes of very many people. Purpose, or the good, was the obscuring talk in their eyes, because it was like hanging a painting over a hole in the wall so that you don't have to face the void that is really there. It was values talk that Grant called obscuring because he was a classicist. The good, to him, as to thinkers for over 3,000 years, was entirely real. Well, in much the same way, to nihilists, the void was real. Values became common currency because people had become practicing nihilists. Back then to what we were discussing. The failure to resist what people tend to call alien values. Values, you can see, is not the proper language for what I'm talking about. It's not really that the wrong values were welcomed. The issue is something else. It is understanding. Put in a better way, our question is, how is an alien understanding recognized as alien? So that you would resist it and not take it on. Or we might use this rather loose language, how are alien ideas recognized? How is it recognized that an idea is not ours? It's an odd question in a way put like that. What we are really moving toward is the notion of a coherent order reigning in one's mind, a picture of things that is resistant to ideas or proposals that, if they are taken in, will begin to break up that reigning coherence and make a person begin to say yes to things that before this, he or she said no to. This condition of having a coherent picture of things means, in part, that what you think and say about the world is coherent. This being a coherence in your ideas that reflects the actual coherence of the world. Again, the issue is not at all having the right values. I had to be wary of using this Nietzschean language, especially when I'm talking about the very issue of letting something in that has a corrosive effect. The effect of upsetting the health of the organism, making it ill, starting to release bad judgments. The issue, how to identify alien values, is really perhaps how do we identify what is true, what is false, so as to keep out the false and maintain the health of the organism, the society. If the society itself is, for instance, not just an aggregate of individual people, but itself a human organism, a thing given life by man, Genesis. I heard the word hive mind the other day. And a word like that might suggest that the organism of a society is a kind of body of thought. Physical bodies may be individual, but people form a social unit, become a people, in the form of this body of unified thinking. Then our issue is the health of this living thing, the society, the collective mind. You can destroy a society by accepting into it what is destructive. And this means that the collapse that we've been talking about is not the fall of a civilization, for which the image of Rome subject to external attackers can be employed, but the death of a society, an organism that has dangerously weakened itself to the influence of bacteria that are always there, noxious powers always present, and it does so in the world of thought, understanding. It perhaps ceased to think that thought and understanding were important at all. This triumphant society was beyond the risk of death. And this would have happened in the 19th century when physical comfort advanced so much. You're looking at its consummate expression here in a perfect image. It's like a kind of icon, an idol. Back, however, to what we were pursuing, the idea of a society impervious to the attempt to import alien values. If this is what the West had to be, impervious, then it had to be able to identify the alien as alien. We have reached the point of seeing that the issue is thought, a thing that today seems like nothing. So we may then be onto something. A time in which thought is nothing is a time of intense vulnerability. We are considering the importance of the question, is this idea ours? This particular idea of freedom? And I'm suggesting that in asking, is this idea ours? What we are asking is it true? And this is to ask, in part, does it really cohere with the way we understand related things? For instance, our own everyday actions. How do we understand our actions? Do they have a point, etc.? And this thing that is related to actions, freedom, does this way of understanding it fit that picture we already have of our actions? We often say that truth is the representation of the way things are, the medieval formula. But our way of insisting on this is careless. That is, in doing this, we're ignoring the quite important distinction between what truth is and how it is found. It is common in grad schools of philosophy to pit the correspondence theory of truth as a representation, against the coherence theory of truth. But the philosopher Nicholas Rescher, who was a Christian, by the way, he died last year, has suggested that the coherence of a view with things we believe to be true, and largely are, it could be, is what distinguishes a claim as a true claim. While what this true claim gives us is a grasp of the way things are. If you think about the core belief of nihilism, you might get some idea of how there came to be an opposition between these two perfectly compatible things. A nihilist believes in beliefs and in the coherence of beliefs, but he does not believe in an order out there in things themselves, apart from human minds, that these beliefs could represent. Beliefs to the nihilist are not representations of an order, but impositions of order on, we do not know. Knowledge is the order we set up, according to the nihilist. There's much to be said about all this, but allow me to close by proposing the following 3 alterations to the way we tell our story. Our story involved welcoming what is alien, which is destructive. By alien, I mean what does not belong, what is barbaric, allowing it in, putting it in the temple, idolatry. The Old Testament does not give much detailed instruction in how to avoid this. Its emphasis is don't. We also fell victim to a preoccupation with others, but the threat was not the others, the enemy as barbarians, forcing on us the alien. We were not forced. The threat was the failure to maintain our own immunity to ideas that did not make sense to us. We've been preoccupied with enemy people when the threat was the enemy, capital E. It came from within, as in the title of this book, a title I'm fond of. The danger came from a temptation to be relaxed in our power, our dominance in society, the glory of the end of history, Victorian edition. And in that relaxation, to allow society to dissolve, society as a kingdom of thought, with all thought cohering together in being ordered to the highest of the highest. Allowing this to dissolve into a kingdom of comfort and pleasure, of security and supremacy and safety and power. These are the three temptations. The bread, not the logos, will have the physical bread, not the logos. Not bread, says Jesus, but the logos of God. Logoi in Greek are statements, claims about reality, affirmations of what things are, accounts of things, like liberty. We had an account of liberty. This shift in society from the one to the other, from the logos, the word that spoke things into being, to the logos, small l, the human account, the account of how man can imitate the word that spoke things into being, the conditions for the genesis of good. The human account, we had the correct understanding of all productive change, the making of good, obtainable by knowledge and wisdom, after Exodus 36. The society successful in its own mind can shift from that to feeding itself on bread, physical bread. That shift erects idols in the temple, which is the trigger of collapse. Too successful, too comfortable, too much the fulfillment of history to care about understanding. This is to make the most basic mistake that can be made about enemies, and that is to misidentify the enemy, thinking it is the nihilist, and turn your back on the true enemy who is working within you. Finally, in responding to those others, we judged them. Aware of the others, the dissenting, not hordes, but minority, we focused on their rejection of our ways, these enemies of our way of life, our constant refrain. Look at what they're doing wrong, like a censorious parent. The enemy is doing wrong. Is he? Would it be reasonable for us to ask, how should he think about freedom when he has come to think like a nihilist? He should do his thinking, we should do ours. If he was coming up with a coherent outlook that matched his deepest convictions about the nature of the world, you might say that that is a good thing for a rational creature to do. Why didn't we do that? And the deeper answer here is that the nihilist was coming into the world, breaking free, working out his own way to live, while we were the people generally in charge, in power. And there's little for people in power, being in that state of sufficiency, to fight for. There is a sense that your civilization is built. Your culture is the culture. Its walls have been raised. You don't need to be those walls. But the walls of a culture are the understanding of the people. And where that understanding is lost, it becomes impossible to see a hole punched out of your city wall as a whole. The danger lay in triumph, being the dominant culture. Nothing was imposed on us. Freedom is not free, paid for by our superior tradition. In answer to the question, why did people with classical beliefs not reject what had no place in that outlook, the answer has to be what? They did not have classical beliefs. They were not healthy. They did not maintain themselves. They object to the new ways, the bad fruit of the newly licensed activity, without realizing that they are doing the licensing by not countering false claims like those of Mill with their own conception of liberty. They objected to the blackened fruit of vice, but they did not object to the notion of freedom that was delivering it. When Christians say, this is not liberty, and I can tell you why, but I doubt you care. When Christians say to the nihilist, that is not liberty, so I can't endorse it as liberty because it isn't liberty. When they say, yes, I am an authoritarian in your eyes, how else could you see it? But I'm actually the one making sense. I am the one humbly recognizing actual human good, which is greater than me. When Christians learn to speak this way in their own voice, they will find ways to extricate themselves from the regime of yes-saying to the deadly suggestions of modern liberty. I will give the penultimate word, at least to a figure from the background to this flag of liberty, the Reverend Jonas Clarke, writing in 1765, in nothing special, just some instructions he wrote down for a civic officer. We have always looked upon men as a set of beings naturally free, and it is a truth which the history of the ages and the common experience of mankind have fully confirmed, that a people can never be divested of those invaluable rights and liberties which are necessary to the happiness of individuals, to the well-being of communities, or to a well-regulated state, but by their own negligence, imprudence, timidity, or rashness. They are seldom lost, but when foolishly forfeited or tamely resigned. The reason I cannot end here is that Clarke warns of foolishness, negligence, timidity, and who here is willing to say, that is me? Clarke's strong words are rhetorically weak if they are too difficult to accept. So I need to encourage you that we belong to the tradition of wisdom means nothing. The tradition of wisdom is not a club with members. It is work. It is action. It is not belonging to the tradition that believes in virtue that matters. It is virtuous action, which for a rational creature involves speaking up and refusing what is false, saying that you will not have it, support it, agree to it, because that is not freedom. Speaking truly is virtue. Reluctance to say what is true is cowardice, not virtue. The foolishness that Clarke is talking about is the acceptance by the people of nonsense. Individual freedom sounds good to me. What is the precursor to foolish acceptance? Ignorance about the actual views of your tradition, which are views meant to direct your behavior. It doesn't matter that these views are in your tradition. If they're not in you, they were not handed down, and you have no tradition. Clarke also mentioned negligence. This is the neglect to learn what your tradition existed to teach you. And when a democracy replaces a republic, so that you, the average person, vote things up or down, the ignorance of average people is a fatal weak point. Individual freedom? Why not? Clarke also spoke of a people tamely resigned. Beware, he is saying, you think you're not tamed and rendered pliable by the forces depriving you of justice and liberty. Have you ever complained, in words like those used by Grant, that today the idea of purpose has been destroyed? However could an idea be destroyed? What has been destroyed, and I'm quoting from an interview, notice, Grant was speaking loosely, but people think in this way. What has been destroyed is the society, which survives only in the mind of its members. By holding in that collective mind an understanding of the truth accepted by the people. If it is not your work to know and make other people know what freedom, for example, is, then you have already been rendered impotent, a dead cell in the hive mind. If people cannot explain what freedom really means in their tradition, because they're counting on a few college professors, the experts paid to know this, to know what philosophers used to say about freedom, while the rest of the people get on with the merry business of making money and spending it on enjoyment, inside the fortress of their superior tradition, or even just honorably working away in service to your family, patients, and community, as the logic of modern liberty sets the boundaries for you and all these people you love. Well, friends, that is exactly what created the landscape of literal filth, misery, and death. It is now erasing what we once called our home and doing it blasphemously, really, in the name of freedom. And what is important about that home is not that it is nice to live there. It is that the people there are living, not dying. Thank you indeed for your patience.